There. That's a good start. Hey, everybody. Can you see us? Are we live? Is this happening? Are we real? Hi,
I'm a
hi,
real boy.
hi. Welcome, everybody. I have my good friend Logan Cohen of healinghumanity777. We connected on social media, and we just fans of both platforms. I'm a fan of yours. I'm assuming.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Get out of here.
um, and it's wonderful to have you. How are you?
Oh, doing great, Patrick. Yeah, I appreciate what you create out there as well, and it's been fun running into you and bantering with you a little bit, and on a personal level and friendly level, and enjoy connecting with you. And looking forward to this conversation.
Cool. I gotta say, I really admire your use of TikTok trends because
Oh,
it takes a creative skill to talk about something that you're seeing in your own life or in your practice, and then make that into a funny, do you like it? Like,
and yeah,
like
they're the TikTok trends are so goofy. Um, and the it really is and I'm a master at hearing a compliment and like turning it into a non-compliment. So like first like thank you. And second but also it just like takes practice, and like take the and I'd say like 25% of them get traction, and those are the ones that you tend to see. But don't go comparing your your draft section to nobody's highlight reel, right?
yeah. That is really solid advice. It's solid advice, and I know what you mean about compliments. It's like I have to remind myself to just take it in. I've been in recovery for a long time, but I'm still working on the compliments thing.
Totally. You
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, welcome everybody. Just looking at the chat, everyone's checking in from all over. Welcome. Hi, Kimberly. What we had thought we would talk about is just maybe share a little bit of our journeys of becoming a therapist, because there's all kinds of ways to kind of do that. And when we were chatting earlier, I kind of came at it from more of a traditional route, and I would love to hear like a little bit of your story about like what got you here.
Yeah, sure. I probably had a pretty non-traditional route. I fell in love with doing the work actually while getting sober. Um,
Mhm.
I finished my undergraduate degree at the University of Georgia. I was 22 years old, and I was a raging alcoholic. It was in Athens, Georgia. Yeah, go dogs! And oh my gosh, like very much a drink in town with a football problem type of thing. And that I fit right into that. Not necessarily the football SEC part, but the drinking, live music party band part.
Mhm.
And was good enough at school that was able to manage the academic requirements, but personally I was not doing well, and I knew it. And had the foresight at 22 years old, which I'm pretty grateful for. Now looking back, to go take a job working as a wilderness therapist with at-risk youth. This was in like a wilderness rehabilitation and education space, like experiential learning with kids coming down from youth detention centers, as well as psychiatric residential treatment facilities, and learning to live pro-socially with each other again before going back into their natural homes and like in a community center again. So it was
Wow.
like, it was super intense, and I was super raw and just getting sober, and had grown up in environments where you had a lot of similar experiences. A lot of these young people had, a handful of my friends got sent off to places resembling this, probably with a the more on the private funding side and less on the public funding side. That's part of what saved my rear too, is having access to some other resources that helped kind of buffer against some of the chaos along the way. Um, but yeah, fell in love with working with those kids in those experiential settings, and got sober and started to experience life, and never looked back. Yeah.
Wow. I got sober around a similar age, and I can't imagine doing like early sobriety and kind of navigate the triggers of kids who are probably already traumatized. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
are kind of like trying to come out
Yeah,
of that or come
yeah.
up to sea level in their life. And just how is the button pushing, you know? 'Cause
It
yes,
I mean, it was
I'm a
it
survivor
was
myself, I would hate authority, so, like, you
oh
would have been like
god, and
right
I
in
was yeah, and that was part of also why it was really hard. Like, I was, um, having to, take a position that I always had a lot of pushback against and had never really seen healthy examples of it being done, you know? So,
wow.
like, and I was, struggling to regulate myself, and kids were, really triggering and challenging, whatever. But
Mhm.
it became the most common time span that counselors were in those environments were, like 3 months. I was there for 3 years. So after a certain period of time, I started to develop, a taste for it, and I really enjoyed it and fell in love with it and watched kids grow and was watching myself grow. And in those environments, like the average lifespan is probably 3 months because most people leave within a month. And then there are a handful of people who stay for years and just get lost in the woods and just like are Huckleberry, some combination of like Huckleberry Finn and the Pied Piper. And like kids will
Wow.
just like follow like for 20 or 30 years. They're just like out there and like they're killing it, you know? And that's so you end up with like 3 months. But like it there was, I remember one instance where I really a lot of stuff clicked for me where it was during a riot actually. And um, a group of kids had run away in the middle of the night off from the mountain, and the groups live separately and come into a community space a few times a day to eat. And like you go to a certain place for showers and like rotate around the mountain, either chopping wood or playing a group game or building one of the cabins that we would live in,
Mhm.
throughout the year. We're working on our papers or for school or whatever. And so what happened times there was a riot. These kids ran away in the middle of the night, and they found a hunting cabin nearby, and they stole a bunch of guns, and they were going to come back to camp and shoot up. So there's like everyone's running around. It's kind of like mayhem. Like the helicopters and dogs eventually came. We're like trying to round up all the kids and get them into vans and get them off the mountain because meanwhile we know there's another like platoon coming basically that we didn't want to run into. And my group hadn't eaten, I mean, like, I don't know, 20 hours at this point. It'd been a long time. And these were kids in settings that, like, I would say 90% of them had been in the foster systems to some degree. And they were all traumatized and all had been neglected and all, but really reactive and starting to freak out. Some of them had blood sugar issues. So, like,
Mhm.
they hadn't eaten for a while. And like, things are getting pretty hairy. I eventually get to community and get a tub of food and have just like some sandwiches and like applesauce and like whatever just stuff I could get together. Have a tub. I'm coming down to like our space where my group lives. And I'm carrying this big thing, and one of the kids in the group, he was basically like, the big intimidating kid, hated me. And I met his dad. He didn't hate me. He hated men, and it felt like really unsafe just around men. And I met his dad during a family visit. And I could see why he came into that place. Totally creepy, yucky, domestic violence dude.
Mhm.
And he'd been just like constantly trying to goat me into fights, and I just like was notoriously non-reactive with kids. So I'm
Mhm.
coming down, and he sees that both my hands are wrapped up, and he's like, "Oh, dude!" Like, as soon as I saw him look at me, I was like, "Oh shit, I'm about to get clocked."
Mm.
And kid just walks over and just whack. Um, I'm holding the thing, like, hey, the stars, whatever. And I realized it's like everybody had crowded around at that point and was like, we're finally about to see Logan kick this kid's ass. And it's like there were these kids fight. And I'm pretty sure like this is
Hmm.
gonna be gnarly. We've been like waiting for this. He will like not fight this kid. It's gang wars out here right now. No program director is gonna roll up. This is gonna be on, right? And I
Wow.
look around and everybody's looking at us, and I was like, okay, well, that's, I've managed to not react in these situations historically. It's like, let's not start doing this with a child right now. And I also realized that's also what he wants. And I
Right.
looked back at him, and he was scared. Like, and I was like, oh yeah, like you're not even scared of me. Like you're like I'm the freaking boogeyman to you right now. Like you think you're about to get clobbered. And so it's like I'll call him Alex.
Mhm.
Like Alex, are you done? And he looked at me just wide eyed, and he was like, "Yeah." It's just like permission to be done. And I was like, "Okay, well, can you sit down?" And he sat down. I was like, "Everybody, sit down." And everyone was in a circle and sat down. And I put the tub down, took the lid off, and fed everybody.
Wow. Wow. I'm blown away. Wow.
And then from that point, we had some momentum going and just took
Yeah.
care of some basic needs. So it's like, all right, everybody wrap up, grab your essential items, we're going to the van, we're out. And like we're the first group off the mountain.
Incredible. I'm so impressed in the way that those kind of experiences, because sometimes to be a therapist is to be so available for someone's trauma.
Sure.
Sometimes that is to be the target of their trauma, their projections or whatever, like, and as I'm hearing you tell the story, I'm like, you must after that you could probably handle anything, I bet.
kind
Yeah,
of kind of to my detriment. Like I was a
sure.
adrenaline. I was addicted to high risk community mental health settings until
Yes.
mm, 2017, 2008, like until I really got into my own practice, and I was like, is this boring, or am I just able to sleep now? What is this?
Right.
And I was like, oh no, it's just sleep now. I got to go to therapy again, but I think it's a good
Um, I personally have a theory that related to what you just sort of said for new therapists. I got my master's in '09, and then I worked for 4 years on an inpatient locked psych unit with veterans.
thing. Hmm.
And then after that, I spent 6 months as a community mental health supervisor and community folks with severe mental illness, paranoid schizophrenia, you know what I mean, and group housing and medications, and just meeting their needs in the community. And depending on how the person's wired or the therapist is wired, for me, I think in terms of our mental health and our wellness, I think that like I tell new therapists is like try to keep those places in between 3 and 5 years unless you absolutely love that type of work. Like if that work really
Hmm.
feeds you and stuff like that, because
Hmm.
it's just such hard work
Yeah.
that I just see people start drinking. I see therapists start, like kind of caving, in those environments. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty hard to maintain that level of intensity and stay sober at the same time. Um,
exactly. Right.
and yeah, and like I didn't. I went straight from my household and learning that I could get loaded and like physically be there and not be there, and I was like, ooh, like
Yeah.
wish I didn't know that, but now I know that. And then
Mhm.
like didn't know how to manage my heart rate or my central nervous system without that, and then went right into the woods and got sober, but also got way acclimated to fight or flight, and spent the next 12 years of my life working in those spaces, probably working 60 hours a week, like, like working lawyer, executive finance hours,
Right.
um, just like being obsessed with the work and like learning a ton,
Mhm.
but also like not at a sustainable pace.
Right.
Yeah.
And then what happened when you got out of there? Was there a master's program after that, or different types of jobs that led you to become where you are?
Yeah. I went into a master's program. I studied family therapy with a focus in addiction treatment at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. It's a super progressive liberatory psychology program, and especially being a white dude growing up in the Deep South, who's also a Jewish cat, like
A lot of
I
people. Yeah.
a lot of intersectionality there, like not as much about as a lot of people, but like enough intersectionality to know I was missing a ton if I stayed in the Deep South for the rest of my education. So just kind of did as opposite of that as possible. And again, just like, you know, ended up challenging the crap out of myself and offering myself up to the wolves in order to learn again, which is kind of like what I do
Mhm.
almost compulsively. Is like I'm a bit of a counterphobe. When it freaks me out, I just kind of like have to go into it and like let it consume me and figure myself out again inside of it. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, then when from there for 3 years back down to North Carolina, and I worked in community mental health settings for another 7 or 8 years, and then started my own practice.
Neat. Wow. And how did the social media stuff come about?
I wrote a book and wanted to promote my book,
Yeah.
and I wrote a book because my childhood friends kept dying from overdoses and suicides, and
Mm.
kind of did a deep dive into figuring out what that was specifically for men and boys, and ended up writing a book about it, and then decided that would be the best way to promote it. So I started doing that, and then the social media content got some traction, and just been
Yeah.
leaning into that.
Can you remind me the name of the book again? Because I'll put it in the chat for people.
Oh, cool! It's called "How to Human Up in Modern Society: Heal Yourself and Save the World." It's fundamentally like it's like probably like 150 plus peer-reviewed research articles referenced in it. It could be used as a graduate level gender studies course, even if you wanted to. Um, but it's kind of using a lot of research from anthropology, psychology, philosophy, and some spirituality, ecotherapy type stuff, and kind of where it all intersects into where humans have been evolutionarily speaking, why we have the needs that we do socially and emotionally,
Mhm.
and then how a lot of the social and cultural influence really coming heavily from the Neolithic revolution, which are like agricultural farming communities,
Mhm.
is still in place even as we've moved into modern society after post-industrial revolution age, and
Yeah.
how they're really keeping men stuck in places that put us at risk of harm to ourselves, and at risk of harm to others, where our roles with our species are supposed to be shepherd guardians. Like we're supposed to be the German shepherds of humans. Like we're supposed to be the working dogs that are like have all this fast switch muscles so we can look out for
Threads.
our people and our tribe and whatever. And it's not we're not doing that.
Reminds me of Robert Bly,
Hmm.
who wrote a book called Iron John, and I read that book in my first round of therapy, which changed my life. And Bly is just talking about about healthy masculinity and sort of what gets lost through the centuries. Where you know what I mean? If 150 years ago, you and I would have been hanging out with our fathers, learning how to put horseshoes on horses or how to
Yeah.
tan
And your
leather.
name would have been Smith
Yeah.
if you were black. Yeah. They would have been like that built into your purpose and who you were and the meaning of how you made of life.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Love fascinating stuff in a way. Like now we just don't, I think that men are just trying to figure out where do they now fit in or stand, you know what I mean,
Hmm.
as sort of like husbands and fathers or not. It's just, to be honest, it's like kind of a mess, but I think that that's a good thing. you know?
I think it is too. I think we needed to there needed to be a mess of all that in order to realize that it was a lack of integration of our natural humanity that's actually the barrier. You know, if
Right.
you can access a full range of emotional intelligence, if you have enough relational skills because you've been humbled from your positions of relative entitlement from patriarchy, but all those things are you have
Mhm.
to learn how to do those. You're not going to learn how to do those being the top lobster on the hill, and
Yeah,
because humans are just much more complicated than that.
right. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, go be the top lobster on the hill, but do you know how to connect with your son? Probably not,
No,
'cause there's generations
no,
of lobsters or what lobsters.
yeah,
Like, it's just like, I think that's where I think we need to kind of go is to be able like where because I think, even for the listeners out there, regardless of your gender, like when you think about your relationship with your father, do you shudder a little bit? Do you know what I mean? And like that's the
sure.
problem. That's
There's like a conditioning of fear
oh
to the
yeah,
role of father, and that's like internalized as like how you relate to men, or like even to
right.
what you like think about as assertiveness, or what. And it's like, oh, like imagine a world where emotional men are not called sensitive, and assertive women are not called bitches. Just imagine that, man.
Right.
Like, like,
Yeah, beautifully said to shift those
yeah,
paradigms. Right.
yeah.
Right. It's just like I just find that I think real masculinity is your ability to feel everything, because it's just
That's a
so important.
requirement for resilience.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a
Oh,
requirement. Even if we're talking about the concepts of alpha or of leader or whatever, like even it's not like we're not silverback gorillas. It's not whoever is like the broadest back or the broad whatever,
mhm.
like that was otherwise would be gorillas. It's whoever can be trusted through tension. Whoever can be the reliable person that everybody can come to and lean into for empowerment and truth and comfort and reliability. And that requires emotional safety.
Yeah. You were so in tune with each other because when I think about I think almost like a question for us to play around with our heads is like when we think about the masculine, is it safe because of aggression and protection or bravado? Is that, or something or some alpha, whatever alpha means? Is that what we consider we feel safe by? Or is it do we I feel, safer around men who can kind of open up and be real and not have that going on, you know?
Totally. Or even or both.
Yeah,
Or men who can be like such a connected part of their village that everyone wants to interact with them because they're pro-social, and they know how to resource and network all of those needs for helping facilitate, looking out for the best interests of the tribe.
yeah. The both is the crucial thing because in a way that I think as humans we think in polars. You know what I mean? We think of
Totally.
like
Just
as a
egocentric pride, it makes it easier. Yeah.
it's a black and white
Yeah.
experience. It's like I don't want a toxic masculinity partner, but I may not also want somebody who is just an emotional mess either. Like those are, you know what I mean? Those are not your own
Totally.
choices,
Totally.
you know?
And I think it's also really important for like women listening to this as well, or as well as men, everybody, or non-binary, wherever you fall, gender spectrum range, whatever, is it's always and or.
Yeah.
Like we're you can't, even how we work. So like as a as a family therapist, I remember like sure, you have safety, like emotional safety is essential, but like enough reliability and clarity of the expectations and ability to follow through assertively creates the structure where people feel comfortable under that safety. And it's always both um, and you might fall wherever you fall in that range. There are people out there that are suited for you right where you are. And if you're like a super traditional person, the partners that you're going to lean towards are probably lend themselves to being more traditional. Maybe y'all will move in a different direction together. Maybe you won't, but like, like maybe it's a 70-30 egalitarian split. Maybe it's like super 50-50 and y'all are like the most progressive thing since, Switzerland, like whatever's clever. But it, like, nobody gets to judge what's clever for you. You get to define that, and you get to create whatever standards for whoever you're going to align with out there in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
However you judge them is probably how you're judging yourself. So let the F up.
Right.
Yeah.
Well said. Every childhood trauma client survivor that comes into my practice, I find that there's a pattern where um, my energy I would really be a fighter, and my work was how to become more communicative and vulnerable.
Hmm.
And some more come in with, just not having a voice. So I think what I'm trying to say is that regardless of the gender, regardless of preferences or anything, like childhood trauma survivors, some of us, our work is to be more assertive and be more aggressive for them, like simply
Hmm.
saying no,
Hmm.
simply, incorporating their voice into a group and
Hmm.
taking that risk. And
Hmm.
some people need to like soften and wind it
Hmm.
down and not
Hmm.
go either controlling or attacking. Kind of
Hmm.
really make our conversation just made me kind of think about that in that way,
Totally. They're
where
both so important. Just yin and yang. They're both required.
and because we're all battling our survival strategies. And sometimes my survival
Hmm.
strategy was to sort of be loud. I mean, I was a combination of both, but sometimes I had to be loud and fight and criticize and judge.
Hmm.
And, other times I felt frozen, almost like a freeze response. And I had to, be more assertive in that way. It's a lot of kind of work that comes from that. And with, there's all kinds of feminine and masculine energy going on in those two things.
Yeah, however we define it or learn to define it or whatever those things mean to us. And unfortunately, it's such a and both fortunately and fortunately, there's a lot of socio-political fervor and movement because the pendulum had been moving really slow for a while. So, I mean, I'm a big believer that within chaos, there's opportunities. I'm
Same.
glad that's moving. There
Yeah.
needed to be dust kicked up. The other part, though, is whatever areas that will light up as common friction points in that dialectic, if you will, become really tough to have conversations around without folks projecting a lot of their own angst and disgust and whatever unprocessed stuff onto it. So unfortunately, it's really hard to talk about some of these issues around gender and masculinity and healthy masculinity and what parts of masculinity are not healthy and even destructive or dangerous, are like traditionally taught socially and culturally,
Hmm.
that are super important, even vital central messages for some ways out, some kind of some huge light promoting concepts, right? Like um, imagine a world where all men could identify areas where they had distinct privilege and started prioritizing empowering marginalized voices in those spaces. Like, how quickly would so much stuff shift that needs to shift out there? Now, unfortunately, as soon as we start talking about men, and as soon as we start talking about masculine, like as soon as we just start talking about some of these things, people are going to go, and it's unfortunate. And the powers that be are really good at creating narratives that make groups of people, that make coalitions do that. I would encourage everybody, be careful at what you're outraging at and why you're outraging at it. Ask yourself a lot of Socratic questions.
Yeah. Can you give me an example? Like sort of like somebody like white male position of power, he could be doing so much more instead of kind of rallying a certain group, if I have you right? Or
Yeah.
yeah.
So gosh. Um, I would say on both aisles in all kinds of ways. I think, even our president tries to do a lot of like fake D&I bullshit, if you will, like fake, like, oh, I'm part, we're like a Democratic vote, and we're gonna, have like, vice president, but the woman of color, and we've got Kamala, and we're gonna push this, and it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, but how much is actually happening? Like, you're really good at saying the things that you want to say, but meanwhile, there's like a huge populist backlashes in everywhere that groups have figured out how to finagle any kind of leverage. And then,
Right.
meanwhile, you have folks like Donald Trump that have, realized that they can play to certain groups and into certain areas of rhetoric that really get people's unresolved, like inabilities to regulate fear and shame of the unknown, and use all that energy to push his agendas and some like more obviously yuck ways. So I think it's, it is everywhere.
Yes, and I think, yeah, I think whether it's government or at home, like, where would we be as a society if actually men were more shepherds in the way of
Hmm.
our kids in this country getting what they need, our
Hmm.
kids in the community getting what they need? Can
Hmm.
we do more to keep kids safe? Or even in a better way, like, what can we do more to make families less stressed out? Because with more stress and with more poverty and with more strife comes more abuse. You know what I mean? It's just like in
Sure.
other words, like from a place of being human, even in my own
Hmm.
family system, like my parents wouldn't have accepted resources,
Sure.
which is another kind of issue. But if they were available to them, more access to therapy,
Hmm.
healthcare that wasn't an effing nightmare or whatever, or just trying to like,
Sure.
like make your bills and stuff like that. Like it's like happier families that they can focus on actually raising children with intentionality.
Absolutely. And
And
in a world where like men are emotionally attuned, like if then that really tends to be the primary marker about like where all this stuff gets skewed is like
right.
we're so conditioned to rely on anger as motivation and just try to avoid the rest of it at all costs at risk of being seen as weak or stupid. But if
Yeah.
the moment where you have to be accountable to your uncomfortable emotions and integrate the intuitive wisdom from all that is where you start being disgusted with aggressive, violent, objectifying crap, and realizing what those feelings are, and you start really like all these every other human has those feelings too, and they're all sacred, and you have a protected, a privileged responsibility to make room for those. Like everything starts changing.
Absolutely. And I think I'm big on the emotional stuff needs to start at home with
Hmm.
kids. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
before, I think it all comes from the nuclear family because it's the nuclear family that is, I guess, for me, the origin, and it's definitely wrapped up in society, but in that kitchen table nuclear family about how do two people or one or a good enough formulation of partnerships or whatever, how do we help kids with their emotions to kind of grow up and be more, or just to not be so aggressive or defensive or guarded, or when I think about whether it's
Hmm.
I don't know where I'm kind of going with this, but I think
It all gets back to healthy attachment, I think, and whatever network of healthy adults are out there to connect with kiddo reliably and accountably,
right.
um, to help kids, internalize the concept of safety in humans, both intrapersonally and interpersonally, and
Yeah.
start having permission to explore their environment, as well as their internal emotional landscapes, without shame or fear, and essential.
Right. My son is 12 and he's not afraid of adults. He can, you know what I mean? He can
That's huge.
ask questions. You know what I mean? Like he
Yeah.
can make a mistake and kind of be okay. But a question for everyone who's kind of joining in on this, like a thought about it. in terms of, I think, like what we're on my mind, an idea is, I don't know if you would relate to this or the audience would relate to this, is I think we grow up in these families and we kind of go through some abuse around gender. Men don't cry. Women are supposed to be available and pretty and not say much or whatever. And I'm really thinking like a toxic family system. And there's a
Just
million ways to
this
someday.
traditional Neolithic isolated farming community gender prescribed roles. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm trying to say is I left my house with determinants to never be like my dad. But the
Mm,
problem is I didn't know how to be in the world.
mhm.
And I think that there's dysfunction in that. And I often talk about my stories where my dad was aggressive. He would make a scene. He would be that guy. He would dress somebody down. My dad lost jobs by taking things too far with other people. And as
I
a
can imagine
kid,
how he was inside the home. Yeah.
right, as a kid, you witness that and you kind of hate him for it. You know what I mean? And it's not just, my mom would do other things too. And it was a similar way. But I had to learn in therapy and around healthier people this missing link. It's like, okay, you don't want to be your dad, but where we end up in that is we choose an equally dysfunctional route. And I joke with
Yeah.
people, I didn't want to be my aggressive dad, but then I couldn't send a sandwich back if I got the wrong sandwich because I didn't want to bother anybody.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work is about kind of still battling what they modeled. Anyone relate to that out there?
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't wanna be your mom, you don't wanna
No.
be your dad, but you don't know how to be in the world. It's a bit of a stuck place.
Or idealizing the enabling or codependent partner. Right. That's another
Yes.
very
Yeah.
common position, right? We're going like, well,
So
when a client's like, oh yeah, like the abusive parent was all these ways, and they just go on and on and describe the shadow bearer, right? And
yep,
then they go with the other parent and they're like, oh, they were a saint. In my mind, I'm like, oh my God, you have no boundaries. Like, but
yeah,
we gotta we'll unravel that. Like,
right.
but like in
That
like,
was
okay, like here you were a saint, and I'm gonna dance with you around that and honor that. But like, yeah.
yep,
Anyway,
that was me. I got to therapy in that same
yeah,
exact presentation.
yeah,
Dad was the aggressor abuser, and mom was the saint that put up with it all. But then it gets wild is that when I was just parroting what my mother had conditioned me to parrot.
sure,
Because the codependent, martyrish, victim-y kind of parent or whatever, um, not all of them, but my mom made sure with me that she was aware that she was the real victim in the whole thing. We were just an audience member. Does that make sense?
sure.
So when that person comes in and they're like, "Mom was a saint," I have a similar reaction to it in a way. And the wild thing is the person coming in with that, I wonder if anyone out there would relate to this as well. More work needs to be done about the codependent, non-protective parent
Oh yeah,
because the
because
abuser, the
you don't know
abuser
to pay
is
attention to
right.
them. The abuser is the shadow bearer. And
Yeah,
I like using that phrase for the shadow. There was a Jungian phrase about the family system. They bear the shadow. They have the nastiest, most obvious symptomatology, right? But meanwhile, other beings in that system are going to have some secondary gains in ways to navigate that the scapegoat's not going to have,
I love
in
it.
your position, right?
I've
So
never.
in your position, you're going to like have no other choice but to
Mhm.
idealize the folks in those spaces, because the other person is taking up so much space and being the nasty, you know.
Yeah, I love that phrase. I love Jung, but I've never heard the shadow bearer. You know what I mean? It's just like where it's almost like a similar thing to the scapegoat because I see the scapegoat in a family system. They are a distraction for bigger things going on.
The distraction for the shadow bearer. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're definitely like you become you're the whipping post. You're
Mhm.
the primary projection object for,
Right.
that's why the scapegoat is oftentimes the truth teller, and why a good family therapist loves a pissed off teenager.
Loves a yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, tell us about that. I think I know what you mean, but like a
Yeah,
good
because
they
the
are
truth's gonna come. Like all you got to do is
absolutely.
track the pissed off teenager, because
Mhm.
they don't want to be pissed off. They're a kid. he was like barely starting to look like an adult a little bit. And meanwhile, it was just like pumped full of hormones, and they're an easy target by a dysfunctional system.
Right.
And so the reason they're being targeted is because they're spilling truths that are threatening the homeostasis, the normalcy of the dysfunctional system rules.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why children and teenagers are, usually the identified patient in family therapy. And I believe a good family, and this is coming from supervised for the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy as well. A good family therapist, part of your ethical duty in that space when a child is the IP is to move that up into the subsystem.
Right.
Is to help the adult subsystem reclaim a locus of control around them having most of the responsibility in these problems because they've got most of the leverage.
Right. So right on. And I have a bit of a theory of what happens though. It's such a wonderful opportunity to go to family therapy, and because you're absolutely right. The teenager is just going to be like the canary in the coal mine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're just talking about, they're pissed off around the marriage or whatever, or they're just telling some truth. But something sad happens because a lot of my clients get to me late 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, is in the toxic family or childhood trauma, we lose that fire as we go into our 20s.
Sure.
Because I think that there's stuff going on at puberty that helps us think more abstractly. So the 14-year-old, I say like an 8-year-old is going to be like, maybe mom will change and maybe she'll be in a good mood today. But a 14-year-old, as you know, is going to be like, they're not going to change. Like, this is fucking bullshit. And you know what I mean? Or whatever. Like, because our brain has developed in a way that we can kind of name things and call it like it.
You can't have magical thinking about it anymore.
Right. Because you don't
Yeah.
really live in that, and
Yeah.
smaller kids are living on hope. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
the older kids, what bothers me about it is they might get listed as a moody teenager when no, they're struggling with the
Teenager.
reality of their family,
Yeah.
But I got to therapy around 20 years old, and I was really fresh from the fire.
Mm.
But a lot of clients, they go to college, they do their 20s, do you know what I mean? They like house the car, the kids, and they're doing that life, and it catches up with them later.
Absolutely.
And they might have a harder time, not everybody. They might have a harder time holding toxic parents accountable because now it's kind of removed. And a lot of my job is to light the fire back up again. So it's a lot of my content is around, I'm trying to jumpstart a dead battery with a lot of this stuff,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think people are reinforced in a lot of different ways for going along with it, and just over time you also, if nobody acknowledges what you say or what you feel is truth, the only alternative is to repress it so deep that even you think is crazy or unreasonable. Otherwise you become crazy or unreasonable. So, chances are, if you're listening to this or watching this, or however you're ingesting this to the stimuli that this is meeting you through, um, whatever themes that you're outraged about, or whoever you find yourself getting, really protective towards, or when you're watching movies or shows, if any type of like specific theme or family relationship moves you to emotion, or in a very dysregulating way, like check that out. Like please check that out before you hit midlife. And if you do hit midlife, by the time you start to check that out, please check that out before buying a sports car and checking out 20-year-olds. Please.
I love what you just said, because it's really so true. A lot of what I'm trying to do in my content is to draw those correlations in a way like years ago, I had a client who was super into the Godfather movies and The Sopranos, and mafioso and that kind of a thing, and like in a way that they weren't glorifying it, but they were just drawn to it.
Yeah.
Like they were trying to fix some kind of puzzle for themselves with that level of entertainment. And like lo and behold, that dad had a separate family. Dad had a second secret family that was never talked about. There was a lot of secrecy or sketchiness, even like criminal like behavior. So that's one big example of how, our triggers are and what we're drawn to are telling our story, like, it's just in a very simple way. And when I started my recovery, I would date women that I could rescue
Oh gosh, yeah.
that were like a bit of projects or, a lot of us do that. You know what I mean? We're still, it's become a cliche now, but we're trying to prop up a parent who is failing. You know what I mean? We're
Mhm.
trying to not be aware of that is bad news bears, you know?
It's gonna come in. It's gonna find its way in. And I would even I would even try to relate that those experiences are a call. Like I would even like, consider you thinking about it in a spiritual sense. If anyone listening that can even muster, and like when I'm not even any specific theology necessarily, even just in the hero's journey, like this is a call from the compulsion to repeat trauma from your central nervous system. It's trying to remind you that there's something important out there that you need to encounter, and that
Mm,
is trying to invite you from your comfort zone into. And the thing about a call is it doesn't stop, it gets louder.
yeah.
And how calls get these kinds of calls get louder are just with the symptoms getting more intense.
Hmm.
And at first they're going to be emotional, and eventually they'll start becoming physiological. You'll start developing autoimmune stuff or having early aging, and it will,
Yeah.
spending that much time and energy dysregulated will epigenetically wear you the F out from inside out. Now, please answer the call. It's not stopping. So like, answer your
Right.
phone, don't you?
Yeah. Before you go, how do you, someone shows up in your practice, you know what I mean? They're looking for help from you. Um, how do you help them through that process where they know something is wrong, they recognize a pattern that is kind of taking them out or they're hitting bottom with it? That was for me with
Sure,
relationships or my drinking or whatever. How do
sure.
you kind of walk them through from that awareness to having some mastery over it, you know?
Generally, the first thing I do is ask what exactly we're doing here. Like, what are the goals that we're setting, and help set very specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time sensitive, like smart, like it's going to be very, and I've enough practice doing it where I can hear what folks are saying and be like, okay, you want this and this, but like in these ways, in hearing like, oh, there's a language for that, and this is what we're going to do specifically. There's the skills that we're going to create. Like there's the gaps that I have or whatever, and like be like, oh, I'm just freaking out. And like, I get you freaking out. What are you freaking out about? How are you freaking out about it? How do you want that to be different? Whatever, and it gets into getting some goals. And
Mhm.
then next, I generally ask, so like, who are you? What do you like doing for fun? Like, when's the last time you had fun? When do you lose time? Start figuring out like flow states, how you process information, your inherent strengths
Mhm.
through,
Yep.
your passions. And then from there we go back into a cold plunge and tend to get right into family of origin stuff. And then from there, I've been doing this long enough and identifying those themes long enough that usually can, once you start figuring out age and your sibling position, your parents' relationship, their areas of lineage, you describing what their relationship was like and what discipline was like, stories start lighting up,
Yeah.
and can start mapping out survival scripts and attachment narratives that are still being used and relied on in stress, that are informing the main barriers to achieving those goals within, like usually like within 20 minutes or so, and going like, so this is all, Like, we're still on the same page? All this is working and not working?" And some people are usually like,
Mm-hmm.
"Yeah, yeah, it's all like, I've been doing this for a long time, haven't I?" I'm like, "You have. It's all good." Like,
Mm-hmm.
of course it hasn't worked. Of course you need to talk to some weirdo with a shaved head. This is what I do. Like, we'll help you figure this stuff out, and help
Yeah.
you figure out what you do. And and then start getting into exactly where they are, like, what have you tried, where do you get hung up on, what works, what doesn't, and filling in the gaps, of those attachment and developmental traumas. Because what I also find, what I like have a lot of fun is, when it comes to complex trauma, like, there's a lot of shit to learn how to do again. Because, like, realistically, we missed out on a lot of experiences that you have to learn. Experience, like, there's essential stuff to
How that,
learn how to like, human pro-socially,
right,
and you have to learn it through experience. You're saying, if you haven't seen it, how would you know what you don't know,
right. How to
and from there it's a lot of,
how to ask for a raise. Do you know what I mean? Like the
yeah,
biggest one for me is how do you have a good fight with your partner where something gets resolved?
oh, productive tension.
You know
I
what I
love
mean? It's just like that is just, that's some advanced stuff to get them comfortable with conflict and really, but like you, I take a deep dive into the family system and see how conflict got wrecked. How it was just like
yeah,
dominant, submissive, how power was taken away and all kinds of stuff. It's just like, but you're so right on. It's like, and that was true for me where I described myself as feral when I got to therapy. I didn't know how to say no or write a check or some really basic things that unfortunately for the trauma survivor, they're exhausting.
yeah.
It's like it's exhausting to go ask for a raise or time off when you don't know how to do that and you're struggling with the risk of that and
It's
like ooh,
very dysregulated. It's exhausting being that dysregulated and not knowing, and
right.
like the running scarcity scripts while your body feels like it's running a fucking marathon. How
Yeah.
else would you have hope in that position? I get it, totally get it. And they're learned skills. I mean,
Mhm.
and you can learn them. And the best time, best time planetary was 20 years ago. It's like the best times now. You know?
Beautiful. This has been a treat. Well, let's do this again. Love chatting with
Yeah,
you. Thank you for
you
everyone who
bet.
joined. Give some noise for Logan in the comments, and we'll do this again. Thank you so much for joining me.
We look forward to that, Pat. Forward to
Any
connecting.
any last words of wisdom?
Um, No, y'all, go do the thing. Go get in the arena, folks. Let's stop talking about it, stop conceptualizing it. Let's go sweat and bleed and cry a little bit.
It's done.
It's light for a Monday.
Right. Great having you. We'll see you next time. Thanks,
Thanks, man.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye bye.